Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Elk Lodge podcast.
Good to have you with us.
Your number one source for news and entertainment.
Something like that.
Today on the show, we have Andy Schaableman, another Sayulita man who I met. He talks with us about his time in the tech world, his pursuance of becoming an actor now, and he wanted to make a travel show. He always wanted to be the host of a travel show, and he just went and made his own travel show. Now, full disclosure, we have not yet shut the episode.
I was just waiting. I'm
assuming this is what we're going to talk about. But maybe we'll not even mention it. So now you know. And
we'll see where it goes.
Also, check out our album, Lost and Profound by the Modern Mystics, is out right now. So type that in, search it, and find it. And why don't you tell them about our sponsor, Christine?
Our sponsor today is Hexa Coffee. We love them. It's delicious, well-roasted, full-flavored, spectacular beans from all over the world. Parker's always learning, making good brews. The merchandise is amazing. It's all good. Anyways, if you're in Chicago, definitely visit. They're in Roscoe Village. They've got pastries, drinks on tap, a bar. It's the real deal. Lots of events, too. Always check out what they're up to because they host a lot of fun things. And if you go to hexacoffee.com and check out using promo code ELK, you'll get 10% off whatever you decide to purchase online, which is great.
Sure is.
And we appreciate it.
We sure do.
And they do too.
They sure do. And without further ado, Andy Schaableman.
Woo! They are really incredible, and you're like, oh, there is something in there other than that sponge. But it makes sense because when the rains come, those cactus swell up so much. They just suck up all the water they can. So if they didn't have, a bone, they'd be in trouble. A lot of them fall over after big rains anyways. It's always like a really sad part of the much needed rains is like those big old ancient cactuses that get too water swollen and...
Well, I tell you what, the Joshua trees this year, or this trip, seem to be super healthy.
Good.
I don't know what attributes to it, but they look good.
There's been good rain. I don't know about in Joshua Tree, but in California, there's been a lot of rain. Obviously, so much that it did become a problem for some people.
My buddy, I remember in college.
How's volume for you, by the way?
Pretty good, thank you.
He had a saguaro cactus fell into his parents' pool, and they had to have it have a forklift come to get it out because it just retained so much water.
It's like putting a mattress in the pool.
Yeah, and then you can't even get a good grip anyways because it's covered in, obviously needles.
Oh, and then you have to drain the pool because you're just going to be swimming just like, spiked up.
It's a bad, first world problem to have, a cactus in your pool.
Well, I mean, but it's funny like in those deserts where it's like we need the rain so badly and then it comes, but it's like, it's too much now.
I mean,
we can't handle all the rain.
It's not. It's usually fine for most of the cactus, but every once in a while it pushes somebody over the edge.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh,
look at that. Well,
oh, you're doing this one. This is good. This is caffeinated, by the way. You guys both wanted caffeine.
Andy requested it.
Evening caffeine. That doesn't keep you up all night.
No, it does. I usually cut myself off after 2, but I figured, I wanted to say something interesting. So
Andy's gonna be buzzing. What do you have going on? Cheers, by the way.
Salud. Thanks for having me.
Salud, my friend.
Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers to you, dear.
Cheers.
Chin,
Welcome.
What do you have going on later?
The guy who I quarantined with at the beginning of the pandemic is hosting a little gathering to, with my friends and to say hi.
Nice.
That was right before I took off for Sayulita.
Wow. Uh-huh. So we met in Sayulita.
That's right.
Which so much of we just had Victor was the last episode.
That's incredible. What a wild ride that must have been.
Dude, it was amazing. What a special human.
So
how did you find Sayulita?
Yeah. A friend of mine asked me for recommendations on where to go to in Mexico, and I sent him a list of 5 places, one of which was Sayulita, and I'd never been there before, but I'd heard it in my circle. And when he booked his flight, I was like, actually, do you mind if I join you? And that was September of 2020. Went with him to Sayulita. Didn't fall in love with it immediately because I was kind of in a group setting, but came back to the U.S. and I was kind of trying to figure out what to do. It was one of those like post-apocalyptic moments in America. Mm-hmm. Everyone remembers. And I just, it kept coming back in my consciousness. So I went to Sayulita again by myself, found a place that I could focus on my body. There was a lot of sweetness there that was reflected back onto me. That was an energy I was wanting to kind of like tap back into.
Sweetness, like kindness of people, or
Yeah, kindness of people towards me, and I could watch myself being sweet back to people. It was sort of like, it still feels like the currency of that place in a way.
It's kindness.
Kindness.
Oh, I love that.
It's a small town, so
Yeah.
you kind of have to be. But specifically, I think the people that stick around are sweet, super sweet. And I mean, I'd like to say,
You seem sweet. I haven't known you very long. You seem
He's a
sweet.
sweetie. I told you.
Oh,
He's
you
a
did
sweetie.
say that. That is
But-
how he described
But
you.
I think like, thank you. I think like I lost that, and maybe I didn't lose the sweetness, but it was harder to make contact with it at some points in my life. I think I went down some paths that weren't as representative of that sweetness. So when I came back in contact with it in Sayulita, I was like, oh, this is who I remember being and who I want to be moving forward. But I was still in my nomadic phase and might still be, but I would leave Sayulita at a certain point because I needed to, because it was like so small. And then I'd come back a month and a half later after having completely removed it from my consciousness. But because at some point, wherever I was in the world, I'd be like, I got to go back to Sayulita. But I allowed myself to completely forget about it. And then she'd come back into my consciousness. And I'd never had that experience with the place. So that kept happening 4 or 5 times. And that's kind of how I somehow decided to, I don't know, pseudo settle there or something.
Well, I mean, you have a place there now.
I do.
How's that shaping up? We were there, like, you had just moved in. You're like, there's no furniture, but we wanted to go record music. And we were like, let's see if Andy will let us go to his place and just record for the day. And you were kind enough to do that, and it was rad. Super fun day. But
Yeah.
do you have furniture in the house yet, or still coming together?
No, I
Who
don't have
needs
any
it, huh?
furniture. I think that's like it's hard, having been a nomad for so long, to take care of something is overwhelming. And I have to admit that the beginning stages of creating a home has been pretty, like, uncomfortable. But I knew, or part of me knew, some higher self part of me knew that that's what I needed in life. And there were some indications in my travels that it was time to kind of ground. And so I knew that the process was going to be uncomfortable. There was a part of me that had signed up for that discomfort, and I'm still in it. Like, for a long time, I couldn't even buy toilet paper. I couldn't, like,
Just because that's, like, too settled.
it was like, yeah, it, like, brought up a part of me of permanence.
Right.
And but I have to say, hosting you guys there for recording and having other people come over and hosting gatherings, even if there haven't been that many or they haven't been that fancy, or like, because I have no furniture, it has felt like an energy has shifted within me. Also, like, to care for a place, to make sure it's clean, to break the things that need fixing, to fix the things that need breaking. Jeez.
Hey,
But yeah,
that's poetic.
yeah, totally.
Well,
And-
and
yeah. So that's been good.
nice. This nomadic version of yourself, or whatever, nomadic chapter that led you to Sayulita. What sprung that, and like what does that look like?
Well, I think there's kind of a couple answers to this. One answer is, like, I think I wanted to be nomadic, that I wanted to be on the road and experience different cultures. It's always been a big part of my life. So that's on the positive side. And travel has always been a big part of my life. Like I said, my parents would travel with me. I always prioritized jobs that would have me travel. Like, I did a lot of international expansion within the tech world before I went down this acting path. So there's this positive aspect of having been a nomad, but there's this other part that I think I wanted to really challenge and go after, which was the part that I think feared commitment and feared grounding, and I think is partly ancestral in nature. My family is of Jewish descent. My parents are from Argentina, but my great-grandparents came from, like, Ukraine and Moldova. And I think home never was a place that was safe, and you always had to be ready to pick up where, pick up should something happen, bad. And so stability in home was never something that was in my DNA. And so, yeah, I think all of those things kind of contributed to me living a life that was more nomadic in nature. And I would go through periods of settling in. Like, I've settled into LA, I've settled into Austin before, I've settled into San Francisco before, and other places, Berlin. But they're short stints, and
Right.
I always will find a way back to be on the road. And so this is like an experiment in holding myself in a space as my like grounding space, and it's good.
So I love this conversation right now, but yeah, is there any, like you said, you mentioned hosting and how good that felt. Is there anything that you like picture yourself doing in your home that you're not doing? Because it's not like you need all the furniture to have a healthy, like happy, robust home, but
Right.
Are there tools that you could, and don't look at it like furniture, but like additions that you could make that would just subtly tweak like what you can do there that'll change and like enrich it, the experience?
I'm going to answer your question in a very bizarre way, I think. I think part of the reason why I was needing home was partly to be able to envision a future. Mm-hmm. So when you ask me, do I envision something with the space that I haven't yet, brought into fruition? I think what I'm envisioning is having a place that brings about in me this sense of imagination. And I think I'm in that space where I'm just now settling in. I'm making it a home. And from that place of groundedness, I hope to imagine a future, because part of nomading was about just being in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really beautiful way of living, but it also has its limitations.
Well, and it doesn't quite solve the issue of like getting out of the flight mode where you're in your mind. There's a part of your nervous system that feels like you're always fleeing, which isn't so good. Maybe considering your background, It
was cool too. The way I'm hearing it, it's like it's almost like a fear of commitment, but to a place, not like to people necessarily, mm-hmm. but like, you'll stay for a little while. You'll have a relationship with a place, but you're not getting married to Berlin or to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. You want to be able to, and after a while, it's like, I got to move on, Mm-hmm.
That is also generationally happening a lot though.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think it
is more common than ever, but
yeah. And I think I can relate, but yeah, it's true that when you're in that, when you're a nomad, like not only are you not tethered to somewhere, but you're incapable of even thinking that way, because you have to be so in the moment. Because like, I don't know what I'm doing next month or next week. Like I don't even know where I'm living.
Right.
Like I would love to see what comes to mind for you. Shoot it down if you want.
Sure.
You don't have to do anything with it, but like, I'm picturing one of those roll-up maps, but like whiteboard style. If you want the creative energy, like little things, we talk about our dream like art studio. But if you've got the space, like maybe just incorporate some tools for the creation process and see if it even if it comes along and takes more shape that way.
I think that is part of the reason. One of the reasons that I'm excited about the place is to be able to, because I was, creativity and imagination go hand in hand. And so be able to have spaces there that kind of can, within my place in Sayulita, that can encourage me to dream and to create is exactly the energy that I want to tap into. Mm-hmm. And, whether it's that I do the travel show or I do the acting from Sayulita as a base, and then I go out, from time to time and kind of like keep coming back to Sayulita, but I go out mm-hmm. into the world to do all the things that I'm doing, but then I come back to ground to recharge my batteries, to inspire myself. I think is one of the points of it. It hasn't yet happened, right? Because I'm still in the early stages, mm-hmm. but like I have this faith that it is exactly what I need. And don't get me wrong, like I had gotten so good at nomading that I knew how to ground on the road. But there was a part of my travels that became disconnected from purpose and more connected to a selfish ego part of me. And there's a very strong desire to leave an positive impact on this world. And I was feeling like I had become disconnected from it. And even all of the tools that I had developed, like creating an altar, unpacking my clothing, all the things that I had learned over the years to ground, they weren't bringing about that sense of creativity and impact that I really felt deeply inside of me. They were kind of playing into an ego part of me, and it was creating some unhealthy conditions in my life. And so I think it was time to grow, right? Like there's always been a part of me that has at some point sat me down and been like, hey, it's cool what you've been doing. I still got love for you, but it's time to grow. And this was one of these moments. And there were a couple things that were, kind of like, happened to me on the road that were kind of like clear, just like, hey, Andres or Andy, why don't you, settle down? You're kind of all over the place. And so that's kind of where I'm at. And I think I feel an energy shift. Even last night when I was at the Airbnb in Joshua Tree, I just was taking care of that place in a different way. I had a different empathy for the owner host of that place. And I had a greater appreciation for all of the ways in which she had created a sense of home for me.
So nice.
Yeah, it's red. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that, like, most people go on these trips or these journeys for the shake up and like the change up and the chance to mix it up. But for you, if you do that, if you do anything enough, it'll become mundane a little bit and you'll get an autopilot mode. I mean, it's easy to sneak up on a person, I guess is what I'm saying. So yeah. Well,
yeah.
You're reversing it.
And I like what you said too, that like, it's good to travel, but it's really nice to have like a home, at least for me. Mm-hmm. It's so good that like there's a home to go to in between the chaos and the trips. Like
home's a place you go to in between the trips, huh? No.
Yeah. I mean, it's, trips are places I go home.
We have some different needs in terms of how much home-based time we need. And for me, I really get ungrounded a lot, like traveling and on the road. And I don't have as much experience. Like those techniques you mentioned are interesting, but I'm like such a homebody. I get thrown off easy. But this guy, he's like the Energizer Bunny. Like,
no. I mean, when I'm away, I just have a tolerance to do it longer than you.
To do it longer, yep.
Like, and I love traveling, but like after like 2 weeks, it's like, oh man, I can't wait to go home. Like I'm so excited to go home.
Eternity to
but
me.
For you, maybe it's sooner that you hit that limit.
I tap out sooner.
There's like people in my life that have like come to me for advice on how to like live on the road like I have, and I'm just like, I try to dissuade some of them because there's just some people that are not built for it, and that's totally fine.
Yeah,
it can be a tough life. But in any case, I do feel like, like there is a really beautiful interplay between temporary and permanent parts of an existence. And so I think balance between those two is important because I think having the infrastructure, the community, and the groundedness of the permanent is necessary, but the new ideas, the inspiration, the creativity, and the sort of
disattachment from possessions. That's something I struggle with.
That and the change in perspective. Those two things do a real good job of contributing to, I think, a beautiful and rich home environment that allows you to grow within a home. And so I'm kind of playing with this idea of like, how can I play within myself with permanent and temporary aspects of my nature in balance? Because I think those two aspects within us and externally in the world are really important to encourage and foment.
Super cool.
Yeah.
And part of that is you've always had the dream of hosting your own travel show.
That's right.
How long have you had that desire, and what do you think sparked that?
Yeah. Well, I first moved to LA in 2009 after like a really fancy grad degree at Harvard. It was a master's in public policy. I lost a friend along the way that I went to spend some time with and who has inspired me a lot. And I moved eventually to LA, and I tried to be a travel show host on TV. But I didn't believe in myself. I was struggling with money. I didn't,
But why was that your desire in 2009?
I don't know, I guess, is an answer. I just felt like I think I always have known that when I'm on the road and interacting with people, there's a way in which I'm capable of connecting that is very unusual for the world and fun for me. And I thought that I could have a unique perspective to share with the world by the way that I would interact so openly and without judgment in different places in the world. And I wanted to share that.
You traveled a lot as a kid?
Yeah, and then I studied abroad in Spain and in China. I went back to live in China. I learned Chinese. Given that my parents are from Argentina, all my family was over there, so we would go visit. We would always take breaks from school. My mom would take me out of school like early, and we'd go on these like crazy international adventures to like Kenya, Tanzania, Antarctica, like wild places. So it was always like built in me.
You went to Antarctica?
Yeah, I spent the millennium there. Actually, we didn't die.
Shit.
Yeah.
Damn.
Mom's
and
like,
so,
if this goes down, I don't want to be near any people. We will not be
going
in
south.
LA. We're going south.
Going as south as you
We're
can
waiting
go.
it out. We're flying south for the winter.
So you had the desire to travel. You love the adventure of traveling. And it sounds like maybe that's coupled with wanting to be on TV.
Yeah,
And this is like,
I think I was trying to figure out a way to have impact in the world and to use travel as my mechanism for it. And maybe I had seen like I had seen Andrew Zimmern and Anthony Bourdain and like they were very influential, and I was always excited when I was watching those shows. And anyway, when I came out here, I tried to do it, but again, like the fear of money and all these things came into my head, and I was like, fuck it, I need to figure out another way to like still travel, but I need money first, because if not, all of these insecurities are going to keep coming up. And so eventually, through a connection through hosting, I met this woman named Venetia, who was one of the first 5 Airbnb employees, who's actually from like not so far away from where you're from. She's from Schaumburg, I think.
oh, shit.
Yeah, and her twin brother
We're
is
both from there, from Deerfield. Yeah.
her twin brother is one of my best friends now. And
Wow.
Anyway, so she reaches out to me when she's in San Francisco, and I'm already there. And I start hanging out with all of her people, like all of the Airbnb people, and they're like, those are my people. They're like travelers, they're open-minded, they're all about letting people into their homes. It was, a funky group of young people. And I was like, okay, let me make my full-time job getting a job at this wacky company, basically. And so I would put aside friends and anything that would come in my direction. Anytime that Venetia was like, hey, we're having a grilled cheese party over here, grilled cheese making party. I was like, okay, I'll be there. And I was pretty tunnel vision at like, I didn't know anything about tech or equity or any of those things, but I knew that I wanted to be around people who were so open-minded and were so like connected to travel.
And so these guys were like, we got this idea for this company where you let people live in your house for like a few days, or right? Is that like the...
Yeah. It started, I think, more, because actually Airbnb is airbed and breakfast. So it was adding airbeds to conferences, like designing conferences, and the 2008
airbed, like an air mattress.
Yeah, that's what Airbnb stands for. Airbed and breakfast, not actually Airbnb.
Okay.
Anyway,
Cute. How cute.
Yeah, and
so it was. They were going to be selling airbeds.
They were going to be selling space on their airbeds in their apartments during design and Republican and Democrat national conventions at the time.
Wow, that's how it started.
That's
so
how
it was
it
just a air mattress on the floor.
Correct.
And this
Inside
is
of
a way to rent one.
Affordable housing crisis in DC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was like a wacky idea. People had never heard about it. And when I eventually did join, I think I was one of the first 30 employees, and it was like this wild ride. And I think on the second day on the job, I was in Berlin and Hamburg, and I had fulfilled this dream of traveling, getting paid for it, and being around people that were really cool, connected to a larger mission of impact at the time, especially. And one of the things that I eventually ended up forgetting that I'm remembering now was like I had gotten there because of my pursuit of the travel show host on TV thing, by pursuing that very thing from my heart, even if it was going to fail and it was going to, bring all my insecurities up, and it didn't last long at the time. My commitment to following my own path, even after the fancy grad degree, when everyone's going and getting their jobs at the World Bank or the fancy consulting companies, I was like, nope, I'm going to try to be a travel show host because that's what my heart wants. That very thing is the thing that led me to Venetia and this job at Airbnb. And So I found a way to fulfill the need around the security, but to also fulfill the need around travel and impact.
Yeah. You kind of got everything you wanted.
I kind of figured it out.
Even though it wasn't exactly what you wanted or what you were going for.
Yeah. Yeah. And for a while there, it really was one of the most, to this day is the most beautiful professional experience, professional and personal, because at the end of the day, those were all blended at the time. But like all good things,
Must come to an end.
there's heartbreak at the end a little bit.
So how long were you with Airbnb?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah. And I led all of their international expansion. I opened up all their offices in the different markets abroad. I think it was 12 offices in 11 countries. And I hired something like over 300 or close to 400 people, somewhere in that range.
Wow. How much time do you spend in a place when you're setting up an office? Like you fly to wherever?
Well, that was like what my bread and butter, what I kind of became known for in tech, was being able to do the unthinkable well and fast. And I think I could set up an office legally and with an actual office space in 3 weeks, when it would normally take somewhere between 6 months and a year in the way that you'd normally do it. But this was really important for Airbnb that it'd be on brand. So I was just really good at going out to random places like a doner kebab place and hearing Spanish in Berlin and being like, I need to hire in Spanish in this country. So I'm like, and I'd go to the group at the doner kebab place. I'm like, hey, I don't know if any one of you is looking for a job, but like we're hiring. And then I'd hire some people from that donor spot. And then next to it, the very lawyer that I needed to talk to about making the business legitimate was right there.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, like the serendipity of it would kind of just create the office. And it required, I had a lot of trust from Brian Chesky, the CEO, still current CEO and founder, because his whole thing to me was like, I don't care how you do it, just create one Airbnb. So make sure that our culture and all these different places is unified. And that was like what I did. And I have to say I did a pretty good job. Like it was very, it required a lot of like soft skills of understanding, well, not only how to hire people, but then how to connect that culture to a headquarter culture and have like a flow of culture going back and forth, like the Brazil office and the San Francisco office, or the Brazil office and the Copenhagen office, right?
Right.
How
Things like
fun.
that.
That's
Wow.
crazy, challenging, and exciting. How did you know it was time to go?
Well, I had really fought and bled and like sweat for the casual host. Like those magical experiences that you could have on the road with just, locals who were so proud of their home and they wanted to give you an experience. And that ethos was what I fought for. And I protected that ethos.
In opposition to like the duplex or like the people who have a row of apartments that they're listing or something like that.
Or even a hotel experience too. Like I really valued human connectivity. And at the beginning we were big believers that, like, I think our first motto or brand was travel like a human. It was all about the space and the person. And I just had some incredible experiences, like super high highs around the world, like being taken on the back of a motorcycle in Rome at like midnight with this guy who wanted to show me what Rome was like when there were no people around. And
The real Rome.
yeah,
Because now
his
the
Rome.
experiences exist, but those didn't, I imagine, when you worked with them.
Right. I mean, now those experiences do exist, and that's kind of an interesting kind of that they've come back to it. But for a period of time, and where my heartbreak ended up happening with Airbnb, I think we stopped caring about the casual host. We hired some people that were committed to bringing the standard of hospitality up, which it made sense. Like, I think to mature the company, they needed to do that. But in doing so, we also cut out the bottom, which was like the terrible experiences, which I'd also had. But to do that, we also cut out the top, the incredible experiences of human connection. And some of those hosts that I had made promises to, like, had told them that I'd have their back, that I'd advocate for them, like all the events that I had done to support them, to connect them to a broader community, it no longer felt like it seemed to matter for the company. And it was just hard because I had invested so much of myself into it. And I really felt like it was a heartbreak, and people like me at the company for a period of time no longer had a place. So the people I think Brian will tell you, at least he's told me, that he feels like I'm a big reason why the culture of Airbnb in the early days was what it was. Like, I was the first person outside of the founders to be able to hire people anywhere, meaning they didn't need to interview. They trusted my judgment because I was sort of like the I carried that culture on my back. And so when the reality set in that maybe we were just another corporation that cared about the buck, and all the things that I'd cared about kind of were less important than the buck, it was a hard truth to kind of deal with. And I no longer had the ability to influence the system in the way that I wanted to.
Yeah.
It's time to go.
Well, and it sounds like it would be extra devastating because you're out there, you're like putting your whole self into what you're doing. Like, you're not just like, oh, my skill is math, so I'm doing the math. Like, my skill is me and like my personality and just like who I am. That's my skill. That's what I bring to the table. And so when it's like, if they were to say like, we don't need your math anymore, you're like, all right, but it's like, we don't need like the whole thing that you are is like, it would be kind of personal feeling, I feel like.
Yeah. And I think I'm lucky enough that I didn't stick around longer than I needed to, because I think a lot of people stick behind because of the financial incentives to do so. But for me, I was pretty clearly all motivated by the ability to impact the system and the ability to kind of promote the ideas that I really cared about in the world. And when I couldn't do it anymore, it was time to go. And it was hard, but I'm super thankful for that experience. And it has also given me the financial freedom to then come back to travel show hosting, which is what I've been doing.
Interestingly enough, though, you do still say we when you refer to the company. Like, you're still team Airbnb.
Yeah.
And you are. Well, are you?
Yeah, I mean, I do.
You
It
used
seems
it.
like it.
I mean, I'm also still heavily financially invested in them, but yeah, I feel like it's a part of me, and I'm a part of them. Whether these companies grow out of their phases that they're in, and they mature and they go public, but I feel a sense of pride that the company wouldn't be where it is if it weren't for me in some small way. And,
For sure.
it gets smaller and smaller as time goes on, but it's still there.
No, but it's like,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Christine is she used to be a preschool teacher, and it's kind of like a preschool teacher has a big effect on a kid. And you run into that kid when they're 20 and they don't even know, they might not even remember you, but you're like, I'm a part of this. Like, everything you are,
remember you.
I'm in there. And like that my impact will never go away from you. And maybe that's kind of
Totally.
how you were like a preschool teacher for Airbnb.
I feel that way. Although I will say that one thing I'm trying to learn now moving forward is how can because I think what I felt was required of being that person, was a complete sacrifice of myself. And I'd like to get back to a place where I can influence a system, but not completely need to lose myself.
Yeah.
And I think that the eventual heartbreak that I experienced at Airbnb was partly because I never created the boundaries.
Yeah.
And I had bought into this idea that I could only be successful because of my lack of boundaries. And so I think that's
that glamorization of working so hard all the time.
Yeah.
To the point where you...
right.
I mean,
I've
you
done
can
that.
only snap from there, really. Speaking from my own personal
I mean, it's just not
experience.
sustainable.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
It's not.
And tech was famous for blending those lines, blurring those lines on purpose.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And so after you leave Airbnb, you checked out
Yeah.
and you did the dishes and you left. Where'd you go directly from there? Like what was
Yeah.
kind of your first, like, all right.
I went into different tech worlds, and
Did you do something with Fiverr?
I did eventually, yeah, and I got to lead their international expansion.
So similar position. You were like, I did this for Airbnb. I can do this for you.
Yeah, but this time as like a VP. I got to go on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange when they went public.
Whoa.
And that was so cool because I think it kind of was this capstone on my corporate career, because it was like I've accomplished what is the thing that you look to do. I checked the marks.
Yeah.
And while I'm proud of it, I'm not necessarily in this place of heart expression fulfillment that
Sure.
I have always been connected to and has driven my actions.
Sure. It's like you finally...
Corporate does have a way of crushing souls. Let's be honest. It's just, they didn't get that reputation, by not earning it.
That's true. But I think also like you get into a situation that you think, oh, that'd be so sweet to like do that or work for a company like that. Or I'm really talking about myself. Like, it's like, all I want to do is like work for a production company. That was my attitude at a moment. And then I had a job working for a production company for the Dudesons. It was like the most fun job ever. But then I realized, oh, wow, like I wouldn't know this unless I was here, but I know that I actually don't want this. Like, and it's like, I would only, you only know you don't like it once you taste it, And it's like, it sounds like maybe like you got to this really accomplished point that a lot of people would be like sort of jealous of and be like, man, but you're standing there and you're like, turns out this isn't it for me.
Well, yeah, because my entire life, like there was always this, again, it's ancestral nature. So your survival is dictated on your ability to hit these external markers of success should anything crazy happen in the world and you need to kind of like, pick up where you left off. My own, like going to the fancy grad school, I worked at Google for a period, like hitting these check marks, like were about survival. And
because like if you hit these check marks, you're more likely to survive.
That's part of it, I think, deep down. But the mechanism through which you that comes into fruition is by using external validators of success to drive you forward. But you use external validators enough, and you're left with a life that is living for other people's expectations and approval of you.
Yes. And we were actually just talking about this, which is a great segue. You just teed up, because now you're into acting, which is very much an internal, it's like the most internal art form there is, but also the art form that seems to seek the most outside validation, other than maybe stand-up comedy, where it's an art form that like without the outside validation, it almost doesn't exist. Like it doesn't exist just on your own. But how has that been getting into acting? Well, we were talking about it a little bit, but yeah, it's like kind of dealing with, there is some outside validation you're seeking in some way, but it's also, you're just trying to do it for you and make sure it's fun.
Yeah. Like there certainly is the part of me that gets triggered around external validators. That's still a part of me. No, but the reality is it's like my acting skills are probably not that good right now. And so, so like if I really look to the external validators, like I just watched this movie that I did that was released on Amazon Prime with my parents, and I don't think that they were that like totally that proud of me,
What's the movie?
It's called Franny versus Jay Daughter.
Okay.
And I had to really sit with myself in that moment because I felt the pain that my inner child felt of not having my parents' approval, but I still was able to stick with myself despite also, acknowledging that I have some room to grow in terms of how good I am, because I'm developing a skill and I'm working through a process that I'm enjoying.
Which is great.
Right.
That's the whole thing.
And I feel like for large parts of my life, I disconnected from my joy out of this pursuit of the external check mark. And this has been a real gift. This process of acting has been a real gift in reminding myself of, sticking with that which is alive with me, which is, that part of my heart that like gets excited, gets scared, gets turned on, gets feels like it's growing, and not for some outcome. Yeah, of course, if I watch the Oscars, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could do that,
Sure.
et cetera, et cetera. But day to day, my driving force is to just act. Like this week, I was in a film where I got to play a recluse who has to make a choice whether to kill off my roommate who just killed my cat or kill the demon cat that my previous cat had become. And I make this decision to save my roommate. Anyway, the point is, I'm not acting in like these, these aren't like big productions.
Sure.
But
They're not yet Oscar nominated.
But even then, even if they're not,
Even if they never are,
I'm
it's still worth
okay
it.
with it because
Yeah.
I'm having a great time. Like I'm bonding with the crew. I'm getting an insight into a world that I didn't know before this. I'm exercising muscles within my psyche that are really useful and like appropriate. Meaning like they're very similar to the work I do in therapy around somatic stuff. Which I'm happy to get into, but it's reminiscent of like all of the ways in which I'm growing, and it's aligned with the way in which my heart sings, and all of these things. Yes, the desire to be in the Oscars is there, but it's such a much smaller portion of the larger picture.
Yeah,
and I'm okay with that.
I commend you. Like I mean, with music, it's a little similar. Like people ask me, like, oh, I want to start like producing music, and just make a shitty song. Like just start, make 100 shitty songs, and then maybe you'll make a half decent song, and then maybe your like 300th song will be like kind of good,
Yeah.
And you just keep making shit, and eventually you make good shit. But like for me, nobody ever hears those shitty songs. Acting, I have a fear. I really want to act.
Oh,
I
cool.
like it. I've always had the desire, but it's the thing I'm the most afraid of and most like embarrassed. And the thought of like acting poorly in front of people. I wouldn't mind somebody watching me poorly play the piano or poorly play the drums. And it's like, look at him. He's trying to do something and he's failing. But acting, it's I don't know. There's either like shame or embarrassment, or it sounds so embarrassing for me and hard for me to bear. So I commend you for acting. Sorry, I commend you for like doing it and being like, I'm not that good at this, but I'm doing it, and I'm showing people my work, and I'll sit there and I'll feel uncomfortable while they think like, well, Andy's, he's we're proud of it. We're happy for him. Like, I mean, I really commend that.
Thanks.
Because that is some strength.
I think it makes sense that would be the case for you because music comes so naturally, and acting is something you would have to work at. You would be a beginner, and that there's always vulnerability in the effort it takes. Showing that you're trying to do something, you're just in that place where you feel most vulnerable to, like, it invites vulnerability, which I think is a beautiful thing, but it's very challenging.
I'm thankful that, through some universal nugget, I found this acting coach. His name is Josh Peiss, and he teaches this method called Inner Atomics. And it is really about releasing this idea that you have to be anything different than what you are in that moment. And you can pass the energy of a character through your actual feelings. So if you're nervous or you're scared or you're worried about someone's judging you, use that in the truth of the character. And that alone will allow the audience to project onto you. Rather than you making the decision of like who your character is for the audience, your audience in your truth will project back onto you. And releasing myself from the need to have to portray a character in a certain way that's anything other than my truth in the moment has been so freeing.
So it's almost like there's no wrong way. There's no wrong way for you to walk into a room and be yourself. So therefore, there's no wrong way that you could be this character. You can't like be wrong.
The only way to be wrong is to be disconnected from myself.
Yeah.
And be disconnected from what my truth is in that moment, which is an incredible skill and muscle to develop, because I think specifically as men, we are not necessarily encouraged to tap into what our actual emotions are at any given moment. And in this form of acting, I'm essentially constantly checking in with my emotions in any given moment, which is so powerful for me. And it's actually the very thing that provides the most amount of safety for myself in terms of creating the boundaries that I was talking about earlier. So that like in what I'm doing, whether it be with relationships or with work, I can stay with what my truth is and not feel like I could be hurt by, getting lost in some company or in some process or in some person.
Right. Is there some kind of like before you act, like with this cat thing, is there like a mantra you say or sort of something you do to like ground yourself in it? Or is it just like, hey, Andres, all right, go ahead, sit over there. We're going to roll. Or like, is it like, okay, give me a second. Like, do you do anything?
Yeah. I mean, I think.
And do you, when you're talking to yourself in your head, are you Andy or are you Andres?
I talk to myself, I think, more as Andy.
Andy, you say, Andy, what's going on here? What are you doing?
I think so.
Okay. Then I will call you Andy as well.
I like leave it open for people.
Sure.
I own the domain andresandy.com for a reason,
andresandy.com.
Yeah.
See, look at this guy. He's prepared. He's
I'm
prepared for
whatever
all of
you
it.
want,
Yeah.
dog. I'm in
That's
for
amazing.
it. I would say two things. One is I prepare by making myself present. So even when I came here, because I wanted to be able to reflect my truth, I like paid attention to what was around me. I found, this inner part of a cholla cactus. I'm focused on what my surroundings are, so I'm not lost in the nervousness necessarily of it. I'm aware of my breath. Real
So it's like
standard
presentness.
grounding. Yeah,
Yeah.
being present.
Yeah.
And then I think there's like a check-in period of like how it is that I'm doing. Am I nervous? Am I tired? Am I low energy? Not trying to judge it. Not saying it's bad to be low energy. Not saying it's bad to be
taking an
scared.
inventory.
Inventory.
Yeah.
And then the character part is what kind of inner atomics or inner energy would my character have? And in this case, I interpreted that my recluse of a character would be really his energy would be sporadically dispersed in his external environment. So a lot of people, like a librarian, might be very grounded and focused in their energy. But this guy was like kind of all over the place. He had all kinds of like obsessive, like kind of aspects of his personality. And so I tapped into that energy and I funneled that energy through what my truth was in that moment. And that creates and then at some point I let go. And the outcome of that is a spontaneous expression where I lose track of time. And I have now attributed that loss of time and space as being good for my acting. At least that's what I've been told.
Yeah.
Like,
sounds like it. I mean, I would like, it's almost like meditating. It sounds like, where it's like, you want to be so like in the moment, but as soon as you go like, oh man, I'm doing it. I'm acting. I'm being the character. Then like you kind of lost it.
Totally.
Like it, and it's like holding on to that thing, but not like focusing on it too much so that you can be here, but you can't let go. Like
Totally.
you can't lose the like sort of grasp you have on like the moment or whatever the fuck it is. It's pretty fascinating.
yeah. And it's been really freeing and beautiful, I have to say.
It's incredible. Yeah. I applaud you.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to say I am there are moments when I'm able to say that I'm proud of myself for going after something that isn't the thing that I was taught to as a kid that was the thing you were supposed to do. I come from a long line of doctors. Long line of cardiologists, and my brother's a doctor, and I think that was something I always imagined as a path for myself because that was the only option that was given to me. But over the years, I have learned that when I show up in my truth and in my fullness, I can be a source of deeper understanding. I don't know about healing for others, but at least deeper understanding for other people's experiences in the world. And that makes me feel like in my own way, I can bring impact and I'll say healing for myself and others. I'm a doctor.
Look at me, I'm a doctor.
Like highly emotionally intelligent, and I feel like largely it's intuitive to you as a person with your background traveling all over and just your natural aura. Aura? Is that
Yeah.
Aura is a
I
word.
haven't said that word in a while. Aura. But is it also like Harvard taught therapy? I mean, where is I'm
There's a
curious
psychology knowledge going on
yeah,
here.
I'm curious about your background and kind of because this is another large skill that's sort of the thread to the traveling. I mean, it's kind of the
I think as
links a lot.
sounds like Matchbox 20.
That's
It's 3 a.m. I must be lonely.
I don't even know where that came from.
don't
I was looking
know
at my
either.
phone to make sure that we weren't keeping you
Over.
too long, which we're not. But that was Reflect by Entertaining Angels.
Okay.
So
Okay.
shout out.
Shout out.
Please don't give us copyright infringement. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, my answer is not that I was taught in school or in therapy. I think those things, or especially therapy, can kind of give me a language that I can use now. That's like a layer on top of the intuition. But I think a lot of like my awareness of my own emotions and my desire to connect in the way that I connect and my ability to be perceptive of other people's emotional expressions and all that comes from my upbringing. You know, I think because I wasn't necessarily able to fit inside the box that was laid out for me, I kind of stayed quiet and I watched and I listened. And my brother was, and still is to a certain extent, very much like the center of attention. That was his like survival mode mechanism as
Older
a kid.
brother or younger brother?
Older brother, yeah. And it didn't leave a lot of space, or so it felt like to me as a kid, to express so much. And I felt like a lot of shame around my own form of intelligence. But I also knew that I couldn't compete for my parents' affection in the same way that my brother was, because he's like a genius. He's like a book smart genius type. And I'm like, my type of intelligence was in a different realm, which was in this like social interaction space, which I never allowed myself to see as being intelligent, but I still knew that I wanted to get the check mark that like I talked about earlier. And so I would do whatever I could do within my own wheelhouse of gifts to be able to bring about that check mark to get the approval of my parents. And it just so happened that I could still get the grade by doing less work, but focusing more on the human dynamics with my teachers. Like, I could stand out in my own way, and I could use those gifts without having to go so much into my room and read and absorb information like my brother would. And so I developed skills along the way that I ended up being proud of, because a lot of that was an external validator. I was proud of those ways of interacting in the world because I was getting the feedback mechanism that was being successful. So I developed really, really incredible like social skills to avoid having to express my intelligence in ways that were an expression of my brother's. Like I created a monster of human interaction, and I was proud of that and am proud of it. And because of that, it also, not all the things that you do to get your parents' approval end up being bad paths. In this case, I'm so thankful about around that skill that was developed, because it's brought me to so many interesting places around the world. It's allowed me to meet so many unique humans, and I've developed those skills even deeper, and I love that part about me. Whether it was triggered for the right or the wrong reason, I don't know, but it is such a huge part of my personality, and it is why I am how I am.
Mm-hmm.
Did you grow up in a bilingual home?
Yes.
And you were traveling a lot.
Yes.
And so probably being...
And in New Orleans, too.
And in New Orleans,
This
too.
is where you were mainly growing up.
That's where I grew up, yeah.
So I imagine being sort of like quiet because of the shadow of your brother a little bit. And so just sort of a watcher noticing. I mean, they say kids who grow up in a bilingual home are often more empathetic or just more able to read a room, because you start going, okay, I speak Spanish with mom. I speak English with dad, or maybe that's not your exact example, or like, okay, and now this adult just came over and you have to analyze, oh, okay, I'm going to speak English to this guy. Or, and like you just sort of, you become more perceptive about like how to read a room.
It reminds me of when we were in Porto in Portugal over the summer. And I was just mesmerized by one of the hostess at the restaurant because she was just sizing up people immediately. We were admiring.
Right, they would just walk up and she'd start speaking French to them.
They didn't open their mouths. They didn't say a word. Sometimes they did, of course. They would start the conversation, but it was
she had
like
a second nature of just knowing.
Impeccable reading of people. Yeah. And obviously we make a million assumptions about people on a split second, but she was clearly.
But it's a honed skill for her.
Oh yeah, she was sophisticated.
10,000 hours she's put in of.
It was very graceful.
And probably you as well. Maybe throughout your life, just watching people and just. Especially watching different cultures and how they interact. So then you clearly see differences. Like if I didn't really leave my home state, at least till I was like, 10 or something. Like, so to like not really see how different cultures interact and different people, you kind of, less about how you interact, like you realize what's unique about America when you leave America, and like, that can be said for any size. I
always thought that was interesting too, because I grew up, my mom lived in California and I mainly lived in Illinois, and I felt grateful as a kid to experience two takes on life. And I did feel like I held different space for myself when I came here. I would wear like more dresses and feminine things, and then when I was back at home with my dad, I kind of had like a tomboy reputation, and it was just interesting. I kind of did. I mean, in my mind, I did.
That's the cute girl.
In my mind, that's how I perceived myself.
As a tomboy.
But yeah.
I mean, you played sports.
I just always like playing sports. I would rather have been playing soccer and football than, being on the monkey bars for the most part. I was just that was kind of how I looked at it. But yeah, I don't know. That's funny. We go way back.
Totally. I can tell. It's beautiful.
I don't know. Does that make any sense to you, what we're saying?
It absolutely does. And I think, because one of the things that I pride myself being out in the world is the non-judgmental aspect that I have. And I think what's interesting is like all of these inputs that I now have around, accents or mannerisms or, maybe they're like initial judgments you make on a person. I think I've done that so much that I'm now on this other side of it where I'm like, there's so much more to a person, like spiritually and energetically, than these aspects that certainly influence who that person is. But it ends up being like this onion that I'm like very interested in peeling whenever I meet someone.
So when you meet someone, you start talking to them, you want to kind of get to the core of that person.
I'm like curious about what's like motivating them, what's at the core, and like these
enough small talk, like you want the real deal.
Yeah, and like these, I'm super open to hearing about like the where you're from and the accent differentials and those things, because they might be windows into that depth. But like I now kind of, or like the color of your skin or whatever it is, like those things kind of have like, they're there obviously, but they're not so much as like, they're not used so much as inputs anymore. And I don't know when I lost that, but it's kind of cool.
So it's more about getting in there.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm not saying that at our core we're all the same. I don't buy that principle, but at our core we all have something very unique and interesting and fascinating and about us. And
I think at our core none of us are the same.
Right. But I want to understand what that difference is.
Yeah.
Like these other things that we've added on top of those differences are kind of bullshit. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're not, right? Because they affect the way we're perceived in the world. They affect our identity. They affect the clothes we wear. They affect the way that we're able to get jobs or not get jobs, or certain, socioeconomic things, or whether you grow up in a place like, in an earthquake-ridden area like Turkey, mm-hmm. what they're going through right now, whatever it is. Like these things obviously matter because they affect your your traumas and your
Sure.
your personalities that develop over time, your identities. But I tend to believe that underneath all the traumas, all the identities, all those things, there's something else. And that's exciting to me to like kind of to experience, because it is an experience more so than understanding.
Yeah, I think.
Well, I was just going to say, at the end of the day, these things are also they are constructed notions, our ideas of all of those things, of what it means to be Jewish or Christian, all those things. So they're not really, they inform the decision, but they're not really individual specific, because you're always going to bring notions of what those things mean. So you're already kind of assuming things about people versus
Right, and that's
stripping down those things in a way. Not to say you don't see them or ignore them or you don't acknowledge them, but
that's what I want to do with the travel show.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I know how other people are going to see the culture that I'm in, but through the experience of watching me not necessarily see it in those obvious ways, but just kind of get to the core of what a person is and what motivates them and how they experience home, for example. Like I'd like to think that folks watching might move beyond these obvious external aspects of personality and identity and go deeper into the essence of who we are. And that's exciting to me. And I don't want to do it from the perspective of like, this is the way the world is and that's how you should think. I want to do it like just by showing the way that I interact in that way.
Say, this is Bill, and he lives
being
here, and let's talk to
model.
Bill.
Yeah.
oh, cool. I would love to watch that show for the record.
I have to be able to show it to
And so you shot an episode. You just went ahead.
Yeah.
Speaking of just doing it and making it happen, you hired a producer. And where was it? Albania that you filmed?
No, it was Bosnia.
Bosnia.
I worked with this woman named Azra who escaped the war at 8 years old in 91, 92.
And what war was that?
There was it was like a whole war in Yugoslavia that was this war between Bosniaks, Croats, Serbs, and it was like this mess because they're essentially all the same. You know, they speak the same language, and there was a civil war that basically ripped them apart, and it was very recent. And you know, most of the 50-year-old men that you'll meet fought in that war.
Was that was it previously like the Czech Republic, or am I way off with that?
It
Like
was-
what was
it
it,
was
called?
Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
And there was a civil war in Yugoslavia, and now it's broken. It's broken.
Yeah,
it's
it's
fractured.
broken up.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine. So she escaped when she was 8 years old, and you know, I told her about my dream about being a travel show host, and kind of told her about the idea, and I knew that I wanted to work with like a local crew, and so she was in Bosnia reconnecting with her, you know, her family, and she reached out and was like, I think I found the crew that we can work with, and they were everything. They opened up doors. We met basically this rap group, but they're, you know, multi-hyphenates named Helemnays. They're kind of like the Kendrick of the Balkans. Wow. Super talented group, and all these other people who's like we wouldn't have had access to, artists along the way that are shaping the current culture of Bosnia. And Azra's process of reconnecting with her identity in her hometown. We went to her hometown, which was incredible. And my process of asking questions around home, being a nomad or having, you know, been a nomad, and still trying to figure out what home is, in a place that literally 30 years ago had fought for the concept of what home was, is the show, you know? And there'd be moments of tension between Azra and I. For example, we went back to her hometown and we went to these stones that were next to a highway, and it was like 110 degrees. And we had this like conversation that if anything wasn't going well, like, let's like just cut and, you know, we'll move on. So I'm like, Azra, let's cut. The crew's suffering here. Like, this isn't a great story. It's not even that visually appealing. And she loses it on me. And she's like, how dare you say that in my hometown? And I'm like, whoa, actually, maybe she's right. And I'm like, Azra, I don't mean to be offending you. I'm just saying this can't make it into our show. It's just not going to make it. And so we both kind of cool off a second. We come back and I'm like, hold on. Azra, why is this place of these stones near this highway so important to you? And she's like, because I'd come here as a kid with my dad, and we used to have poetry readings here, and the whole community would gather here. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show with you was to remind people that Bosnia existed before the war. And I was like, okay, let's get that on camera. And then moving forward, like the historical events that we were talking about were all within this context of what it meant to people rather than like what it represented in history necessarily.
Like what happened.
Yeah.
Very
so those
cool.
kinds of things would come out.
Very
Super
cool. And so
powerful.
the show, you would go to many different places and sort of be interviewing people about, I mean, broadly, the sense of home, or like what home is, or how we define home.
A lot of it was around artists too, and like the way in which artists are helping shape this new concept of home and identity in Bosnia, and the way in which art itself can be a much more reliable source of self-reflection than the projections of some of the political leadership that had led to the war, for example, and that art ends up being this like source of truth. And that ended up coming out in the show as well.
How do you think sports play into that? Because it's such identity. We're from Chicago,
Yeah.
and like Michael Jordan, the Bulls, like that's a unifying Chicago. Like it's part of our identity just as much as Chance the Rapper is, or Kanye West is, as like a Chicago thing. And like Argentina, you know, like, or, you know, where like, or like LA, yes, we have Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and we have Kobe, you know, it's like they all mean just as much to people, and like our sort of local, I'm not from here, but like the local identity. Where do you think sports fits in to this?
Well, I think it depends, because it's been utilized also in political aspects to separate people. Like these distinctions carry weight in the World Cup and in the Olympics. Like how a country is defined has political ramifications that do end up trickling down to people. That being said, like some of the most non-hierarchical types of experiences I've had in my life have come in sport, where you're just interacting with people from a different neighborhood or a different culture, but you're united by this joy of playing this sport, and not necessarily when you're on the same team. Just the act of playing the same sport is this unifying force. And so I think so long as sport isn't taken in this like super serious identity ridden way, which is often like how I think it is like manipulated, but it is in fact just a way that like kids and eventually professionals are coming together to kind of share their passion for something, extreme passion for something in the case of professional sports. Then it has this unifying force, because it's like, oh yeah, all of these distinctions, whether it be team or country or region, don't matter, because we're just here like playing this game. And usually most sports like have a level of respect built into them for your opponent. Now, there are real examples of where that doesn't take place.
Sure.
But on the whole, I'd like to think that even, I'd like to think that even these distinctions, like even in Chicago, for example, between the White Sox and the Cubs, like, is there really hatred between those two?
There have been.
Oh, for sure.
There have been news stories of beatings.
Right. But that happens on the whole. But like if you're a Cubs fan and the White Sox are in the World Series,
I'm rooting for them.
Yeah,
That's Chicago.
And I think, I mean, that's a much smaller geographic area. But I do think like, I don't know, when you looked at the positive parts of the World Cup, obviously FIFA has some really dark aspects to it. But on the whole, all of these countries coming together, playing sport, cheering people on, finding this joy, this common joy in this beautiful sport, like how can that not, for a moment in time, allow us to just let go of some of those things that separate us? So I don't think it's the solution, but I think it gives us a break from some of the ways in which we're often led to create separation amongst each other.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think sports, and I mean, I posed the question, I haven't really thought about it myself, but I think the difference between sport and like art and how it helps identify your home is sometimes sport can, well, I mean, music too, but sports is more often like it's us versus them. It's like you don't really export, like people love Dr. Dre in New York, they love Dr. Dre in Miami, but like not every people in Miami aren't rooting for the Lakers, you know. So it like is sort of it's an identity, but it's like it still kind of separates you from people a little bit.
It can, but there are also other examples of like these, like for example, when the Germans hosted the World Cup, it was one of the first time that they could express pride for their country, and like they could kind of let go of some of this shame that was like that they were carrying.
Yeah.
There are, there's all kinds of examples, even in this last World Cup, where people put aside differences for a period of time, and you could celebrate people from a different cultural or racial background.
Yeah. I mean that's so to go against what I just said. I don't think any music or art unifies the whole world like the World Cup does. Like the whole world getting together to kick a ball and see who's the best at kicking this ball. It's like the whole world gets together around that. And
is
in
that
one
even
moment,
larger than like the Indy 500? Like there's some
For
NASCAR.
sure.
There's some event. No, there's
but
NASCAR
they're not global,
events.
not internationally.
okay,
This is
I'm
the
trying to
entire
think.
planet.
I mean, it's not yes and no.
Where I sometimes harp on sports, though, is the way in which it can lead to a numbing of our senses a little bit, because it's like this form of like entertainment, mindless entertainment.
Sure.
And I think that's where it gets complicated, because we don't need more things in our... I totally get that people need a break from their lives and they need a distraction from some of the things that keep them down. But I don't think we need more things in our life that keep us from thinking critically about some of the things in our world.
Sure. It's like the people are getting restless, so the emperor builds a Colosseum.
Correct.
And let's distract him with some fun shit.
So that's my general in the end feeling about
right.
sport, is that like, especially in the US, like I do think it contributes to a numbing of our society that makes us more apathetic and less likely to kind of put our passions out in the world, because we're numbing ourselves with these sports that I think have some beautiful aspects to it, but they're also, I think, slowly making us believe that we can't accomplish some things in our life, that we have to turn and look towards these athletes to be expressions of our greatness. Yes,
I agree with you. And it's sports. It's not art, but it's entertainment.
Yeah.
Can it be described as art?
Their lives are... The life of a professional athlete is very much an art form.
What do you mean? Like
the
their body
pure
is
dedication and commitment to a craft. They are spending so much time.
But you can commit to math, but is math art? And maybe the argument, maybe math is art, but just because you're committing yourself to something doesn't make it an art form, or doesn't make it art.
I don't know. You see somebody do a long jump and you watch the way that they align all the muscles in their body. It feels a little like art to me. Have that level of...
If dancing is art...
Yeah, dancing, exactly. It's a physical movement that...
I like to think that my way of interacting with humans is an art form. I think that when you watch a Messi move with a ball in the creative ways in which his body is able to float through space and the things that he does with the ball, there's an art form there. And sometimes he's in a state of flow, so maybe you'd say it's not so conscious, but some of the best artists, musicians included, I don't think are necessarily like being... Well, I don't know.
Flow came to mind for me too.
Yeah.
I think it is true. It's almost like there's... That artistic moment of expression comes from being out of your own way, like in that flow state where you're just that mechanism, that vehicle for the action.
Well, what is the definition of art?
I don't know, but Earth without art would just be eh.
I agree. But what is art? I mean, if a basketball game is art, what is
Everything
art?
is art.
Everything is art. So then nothing is art. I mean,
exactly. Everything is holy, so nothing's holy.
I do think that the expression of our heart and of ourselves separate from systems of hierarchy, when you're in that state of expression, that's art.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, also...
I gotta repeat it.
Paul's chewing on that one.
Okay, repeat it. Yeah, sorry.
Chew on this.
When you are expressing from a place of your heart in your fullness, separate from systems of hierarchy, whatever way that expression makes itself out into the world is art.
Yes, I agree. And so then, when is it not art? If I say, I want to build a backpack, I want to start selling backpacks. So I'm going to make a backpack, and I want to make a very comfortable backpack. Is my backpack art, or is it just a consumer product?
I think the act of making it and the act of tapping into that part of you that is fully expressed in that process and that your heart is alive in that process, that process and that act is an act of art. I think it becomes harder to tap into the non-hierarchical nature of that when you start adding in monetization, but it's not impossible to do so. The problem is that our egos start to kind of like come to play in a way that kind of make it easier to tap into the hierarchical natures of our environment. But I think at its core, when you can come back to that part of you that is expressing from that place of fullness and expression and non-hierarchical natures, I think is when you're in that flow state. And then I'm not saying you can't hold like monetization in there, but it's separate. I think it's necessarily separate from the process of creation.
So art, I mean, by these definitions, I made you a cup of tea. Was that art? I mean, I made that cup of tea to express to you that you're welcome in my home.
Yeah.
Like, so there's even like expression. There's a feeling it's meant to invoke, but it's also like you're thirsty and you want to drink some tea. So I made you tea.
Isn't that kind of like the Buddhist philosophy that there's beauty and grace and power and wisdom in every single mundane action you do?
Yeah.
Which is why.
Well, I don't know if that's Buddhist or not, but I agree with what you're saying.
Aside from welcoming me into your home, which I appreciate, when you were making the tea, were you connected to your heart and the way in which you might like express yourself fully into this cup of tea, and the process of making it is like an expression of that?
I don't know that I made it.
He gave you the I Love New York cup? I don't think so. I
There's a heart
don't
on
think
that
so.
cup. No, I mean,
I don't think you need to be conscious of it so much either, but like even like, yeah. Like, was there a fullness in that expression that came from a deeper place within you?
well, what if there wasn't? Is the cup of tea not art? Does it cease to be art because I didn't put my fullness into it?
I think it's an act of kindness and it's an act of love, but I wouldn't necessarily put it in the realm of art.
However, if you had stuffed the little tea, like you manually stuffed the tea leaves and then you put it in a pot and then you poured the hot water on it and you watched it steep and you served it on a tray and there was a matching tea set, like if you put more intention in it, it could have been art.
I disagree with that. Why do I need to put more effort into? I think you can give someone a cup of water.
There's art in the ceremony. I guess what I'm saying.
I do like that. I do want to interrupt briefly because I have to go back to a core belief of mine, which is like, why does it matter? Because why does this question of what is art actually matter? Because
Probably doesn't.
It actually, I think, is it adds more complication to it because it adds this level of hierarchy, because it's like we need to have some aspect of validating whether something is art or not. Right. And that in and of itself is problematic because the container that determines what is and what isn't is the very thing that we're trying to fight against, so that more people, I know this is something you're connected to, so that more people can create. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean.
Yeah. I mean, God, the art world has always been so elusive. Exclusive.
Well,
And,
I think the tea is art. I think anything used to express a feeling to somebody else and give somebody else a feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what art is. Watching a movie that makes you feel like, oh, that's what it feels like to fall in love. Or watching Messi win the World Cup, like you feel the greatness. Like you feel fucking powerful watching that. Like that's art. I gave you the tea, and maybe it wasn't a profound feeling, but I used the tea to express to you
Yeah.
that you're welcome.
You know what? I'm
There
going to
you
go back
go.
on. I'm going to go back just like you went earlier, back on a comment. I think this tea is an act of art, and it's an act of love.
Yeah.
And I think there is like because I have to say I received it as an act of love, which obviously your creation of the tea is not so important in terms of whether it is a creation or not.
Sure.
But I have to say that because of the way that you created it, I knew that it came from such a good and kind place that I was able to receive it. Like I had expressed that I wanted some caffeine. You welcomed me into your home. You asked me if I wanted something, and I felt really loved and cared for. And I don't know if that's art, but all I know is that it created a profound sense of belonging.
Well, and it had an impact, right? I guess anything can be art if you're impacted by it enough to get out of autopilot mode to be like, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful.
But then it's dependent on outside like forces. You know, you can make a painting, show it to no one. Is it art?
Yeah.
So with no outside value, no impact,
Yeah.
you just made a painting.
Yeah, I don't think art needs a reaction. I'm just saying that any
If it evokes a reaction, then it is
consumer,
art.
any person that, if you were a consumer of art, you took notice of beauty or power or something that resonated with
disliked
you,
it.
or you viscerally had a bad reaction to it.
Donald Trump is an
didn't
artist.
like it. A con artist.
But I mean, he creates. It's like his art form is his
Cons, lies.
what he does and his
Blasphemy.
communication.
Yeah.
But it evokes emotion. I mean,
Yes,
to-
it does.
to-
I have not hated any human more, and as long as I have ever lived. You're right about that.
Yeah.
I think that I think that the truth of your expression, whether or not you wanted to create an outcome or a feeling in me, it didn't matter so much because there was a truth in that act. And I think there's something about your truth and expressing it however it is that you're expressing it, whether it be in the backpack or the tea, that is a form of art.
I agree. And I agree. It's weird to try to define art. I've just never really thought about it this much. Like when does something cease to be art? What is not art? If I shit on you got 2 minutes, bucko.
Yeah.
She calls me bucko all the time. I like it. It's fun. It's
like
a fun
it
word
too.
to say.
It's very
Watch
fun.
it, bucko.
Hey, bucko, you better behave yourself.
But anyway, did you have any closing thoughts about art? About
I just think like my own battle to accept my own sense of art and my own, like to accept my own expression as being worthwhile is very much like rooted in this question of what is art. That like we owe it to ourselves and to others to be more like generous, I think, with the way that we define, or in what I'm advocating for is not define things, like to make the container more amorphous so that like people can step into it, because we need more artists. We need more people to create from their hearts.
sure. Or you make it so big that people realize they're already in it.
That's
There's
true.
nothing to step inside of.
Oh God, so true. I love that.
It's like God. Art is like God. Seems like.
Well, I hope you keep creating.
Thank
And
you. Thank you for having me here.
one more piece of I just want to thank this table, because this table brought us here for the podcast, but it's the counter that I always make my art on. We eat here. I
And
hope
we
you
thought
get
about
yourself
not
a
bringing
table.
it.
I hope you get yourself a
need one.
table
I
for
need
your
one.
house.
Thank you.
So that you can, I mean, literally, this is the surface I write on. This is the space. So
Thank
keep
you.
finding those things that,
Thank you.
give you joy.
Thank you for both of your generosities.
Oh yeah, thank you for coming.
Thanks for doing the show, Andy.
Yeah.
Boom. AndresAndy.com. Or is it AndyAndres.com?
It's Andre Sandy, but I should get the other one.
AndresAndy.com.
Either
Go there
or.
now. All right. Good night, everybody.
Peace.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.